Hey there. Welcome to a GSPN Gyro Step and Win in 6 full squad podcast. The Bucks are looking for a new head coach. There's been a lot of reported interviews and some other reported interest from the Bucks and other people. So we're just going to go over all of it and share our favorites so far. By we, I am Ty Windish, joined as always by the verklempt lately Rohan Kadi, the fired up Adam McGee. Adam, I agreed with Adam on one take today, and he goes, "This is going to be disappointing. I was hoping there was going to be fireworks." And the always poised Jordan Tresky. Fellas, how's it going?
Can't complain. You know, we've finally gotten over the fact that the Milwaukee Bucks have been eliminated.
Speak for yourself.
Mike fair enough. Mike Budenholzer has been fired. I feel like there's been some time for it to set in, so it's like, you know, I'm just enjoying the beautiful weather, Ty.
I don't know if I'm quite on Rohan's page just yet. Rohan makes it sound like a lot of time has passed. What are we like?
It's been almost a month.
Not since Bud got fired.
Since the world ended.
Yeah.
It's been a week and a half, I think.
I'd just like to point out, you said that Jordan is, you know, the always poised. I think there's a real possibility that the build-up you gave me could end up more appropriate for Jordan on this episode.
We'll see. Jordan?
The Bucks are looking for a new coach, and they will, if you are listening to this, there's a good chance that you're probably going to get an interview for it, because they're looking at the bottom of the barrel.
Not that our listeners are at the bottom of the barrel.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they're going all the way down to the bottom of the barrel.
I don't think you didn't.
So
you didn't
but our listeners are up near the top of the barrel.
They're passing our listeners on the way down, is what he's saying.
Yeah, it's like an elevator. But yeah, I don't know. I ruined this analogy, and we're off to a good start.
Sounds like we're conducting this the same way that the Bucks are conducting their coaching search.
Well,
yes.
I think the four of us are better names than a lot of what. So should we start at the bottom or the top? I guess is really the question.
Let's
start with the process. Yeah. I think is that the place to.
Yes. So it
how
looks
we feel so far.
Yes. So it looks like, based on the reporting and the candidates that we are about to get into, the Milwaukee Bucks, in their search for a new head coach, are casting a wide net. They are requesting to interview a lot of different people, and they come from all like former coaches, current coaches, assistants, whatever you want to say. They're interviewing them. That's for sure. But it's at its core, I believe that is a good way to go about it, considering like you need to take every step you can. However, that does not necessarily mean that you need to interview everyone. You should start with a wide net, but then condense it down a little bit. The Bucks appear to have not done that condensing down yet.
Yeah, I'd say a good process doesn't generally involve interviewing the worst people. That would be, I guess, the position I take. And I'm all for a wide net. I think that's a smart thing to do, and taking their time. Definitely on board with that. There's some time wasting going on here that, I don't know, could be better utilized, scoping out some other candidates, maybe doing multiple interviews, even early stages with some of the people you like, maybe preparing for, you know, the monumental off season. Don't be afraid to have some extension talks with Chris or Brooke, or plan for the draft or free agency. And yeah, we'll get into the names specifically. I mean, one part of this is, you could be worried that we let this go a little bit and maybe they move fast. They might double the size of this list within the next week. And if what we've seen so far is anything to go by, buckle up, because they're just doing some honestly pretty unexplainable stuff, which just is not good process to me. So I don't find it particularly inspiring. As much as there are a lot of people, and I admire their resilience to just be like, you know what, this is just because they're interviewing someone doesn't mean they get the job. It's like, yeah, but some people are deserving of consideration and others are not. And this is as serious as it will get. when it comes to hiring a coach for the Bucks for, I don't know, let's just put a round number out there that has some relevance in franchise history. It could be 50 years. And I would rather they don't waste any time on people who quite literally are not NBA coaches, haven't been NBA coaches in a decade, were barely coaches to begin with, and just
so
don't
Mark
seem to fit
Jackson.
in any kind of way.
I mean, there's only one.
Listen, I don't want to name names yet.
That fits any. I mean, I think that was a waste of time for sure. And he's interviewed a couple times in the last few years. He doesn't get any jobs. He's pretty irredeemable as a broadcaster and person. Was not a very good coach. Really, I think that's the only one. I think there's some others that I really am not enthused about at all. But I would
think
say
Scott Brooks is like Scott Brooks is not Mark Jackson, so I will certainly give him a whole lot of credit on that front.
I think there's an aspect of just information gathering and getting ideas from people that goes into this. And at least Scott Brooks, like if Scott Brooks was hired, I'd say that's a terrible hire. I don't mind the interview. I mean, he's been in the league the whole time. He went directly from OKC to Washington and then right to being an assistant with Portland. So, like, he's finding work. I don't think he's inspiring, but I don't think it's, like, horrible to interview Scott Brooks. Mark Jackson is a waste of time.
Complete and utter waste of time. I mean, what are we doing here? Like, every time that there's an interview, like a head coaching vacancy, and to his credit, I guess, he keeps getting interviews. And every time I go to clown them because it's like, oh yeah, why are you interviewing Mark Jackson, a guy who held back the Warriors? They're like people in my Twitter replies are like, oh yeah, by the way, Steve Kerr's just profiting off of Mark Jackson.
It's the Jason Kidd Bud thing. They apply it to him too.
They're the same people.
Yeah.
And here's my question to them. Why didn't they succeed with Mark Jackson then? If Mark Jackson is the reason behind it, why didn't they succeed with Mark Jackson? Why are they only successful after Mark Jackson left?
Yeah, I mean,
so it's just like every single time this happens, I clown this team, and now I have to clown the Bucks because they're the team doing it.
I think probably his just straight up win-loss record as a coach gets him interviews every so often. I mean, they weren't like 20 and 60 every year. I feel like coaches like that generally are going to get interviews.
But that's not what we're doing here. They just fired Bud. Like John Horst. I know you're with me on this as much as I tried to pretend you weren't on a recent episode of Cruising for Bruising. I just don't understand it because even I think you're right, and part of casting the wide net should be, this is one of your advantages. One of the opportunities of a coaching change is you can talk to people on all sorts of different staffs and hear their ideas for how they would run things with the Bucks and what ideas they would bring in. So ultimately, you can end up stealing from some of your rivals some interesting intel. That's if you're interviewing like the smart, progressive, up-and-coming coaches, the people who are right at the cutting edge of this is how the NBA is pivoting. This is the NBA at its kind of cutting edge now, but it's also where it could go to next. There are some assistants, I think, on the list who fit that bill, where you're looking at very notable organizations the Bucks have some history with, and maybe you gain something from that, even if they're not necessarily who you want for head coach right now. That's great, but you know what? Do more interviews like that. Just request permission to speak to more people of that kind of ilk, and even with an eye on the future, because if you got this hire wrong, it wouldn't be wrong long before you're hiring again in a very different way. I just what the benefit of Mark Jackson is. Or, again, I don't dislike Scott Brooks. I think he had a disastrous time with the Wizards, which will probably put paid to his chances of getting an NBA job again. I would think so, but then he's getting Bucks interviews, so who knows? I just don't think that's a beneficial way to kind of go into this process. I just don't think that's the approach that's going to get the Bucks to where they want to be in a post-Mike Budenholzer world.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so many people that have been NBA head coaches before. And generally, like, it is rare where you're just, like, out, like Mark Jackson is. There are a lot of reasons for that. If you want to have a coaching staff that records meetings and try. I can't remember all the details of it, but Darren Erman, I think got dismissed or relegated. Something happened where he was recording team meetings and coaching meetings and stuff like that because of how just terrible ship that Mark Jackson ran. On top of all the unseemly details and viewpoints, very bigoted things that he believes in and has said. Not really my kind of coach. just to say the least.
He's not anyone's type of coach, which is why he's not a coach.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where like it. I understand. Like, I think even someone messaged me about or commented on some tweet that I had because I was not happy that the Bucks were even interviewing Mark Jackson in the first place, and it was like, oh, who do you? If it's between Mark Jackson in a theoretical world, if it's between Mark Jackson and Scott Brooks, which way are you leaning? The answer is quite obvious. It's Scott Brooks.
He's a real coach.
He's print up T-shirts with Scott Brooks' face on it. Like, it's not even just he's a real coach. One of those things is completely toxic. Yeah, yes. Like Mark Jackson has had one, and it's not just he's had one head coaching job. He's the exception on this list where he has never been an assistant coach anywhere.
No.
Like, he just doesn't fit the profile at all. He has been a mouthpiece on TV, known for some of the dumbest catchphrases in NBA history.
It's not even just the dumbest catchphrases. It's like, have you listened to him talk about basketball on broadcast?
It's just incredible. And I mean, to get to what Jordan was alluding to with the culture stuff, there were allegations of homophobia, allegations of really, really bigoted things that came out of his time with the Warriors. Like, what are they doing? Like, what part of this is appealing? Like, also, just terrible, terrible relationships with executives and owners, accusing them of doing the devil's work, allegedly. Like, this is the fact that we're doing this episode of the podcast, and it is so important, this whole discussion for the Bucks, and we're having to start with even talking about that. Like, I don't want it to derail because there are candidates who are, not insane, and they are actual NBA coaches, which is, I think that would be where I would start drawing up my list personally. But just the fact that his name is anywhere near this doesn't fill me with the greatest of reassurance or encouragement. It's just a little bit, okay, what is the plan here? I get casting the net wide, and I think that's smart, but this is casting the net literally beyond someone who's coached in the NBA in 9 years. What are you learning there?
Which to me, it's interesting that they thought to do this when they didn't even do it last time around when they hired Bud. We were talking about it before, or in the aftermath of whoever tweeted, I think it was Shams. Mark Jackson was not interviewed for the Bucks head coaching job. Why now? What about his? I guess I don't even know. But yeah, in all, it's probably going to be a blip on this whole coaching search, but it's still just a very big curveball that I just did not see coming at all.
So should we go through some of the actual other candidates that have been?
Please.
We've gotten the Mark Jackson thing out of the way. Should we? Like, the premise of this is that each of us came here with our top 3 candidates for this head coaching vacancy. So, but before we do that, we should probably go through and list some of the names that have been linked to this job, reported to be interviewing for this job. So we have, I believe the first one was like Adrian Griffin, top Toronto assistant. He is interviewed with the Milwaukee Bucks, Scott Brooks, like we mentioned, Mark Jackson, Kenny Atkinson, who's Golden State Warriors associate head coach, Bucks current associate head coach Charles Lee, and ex-Charlotte head coach James Borrego. We also have, today we had Chris Quinn, a Heat assistant, interviewed, or has the Bucks received permission to interview him. He's an assistant for the Miami Heat. And we also got news that one of the top names on the Bucks coaching list is Monty Williams, who was recently fired by the Phoenix Suns. Am I missing anyone?
I mean, not in the realm of Woj Shams reporting, but there has been reported interest in terms of the Bucks are one of the teams who will go after Ty Lue if Ty Lue is to be available. But that's the only other name so far.
James Borrego?
Yeah, Rowan said James Borrego.
Oh, okay.
I think that's it, right?
I mean, I think now maybe it's Phoenix, but Nick Nurse was the betting favorite. Maybe still is for the job, although I don't think we've heard of a report yet. Although most of the ones we've heard are with current assistants and Mark Jackson. I do wonder if there's any others currently that we're not hearing about. Although, I mean, there's been like one per day at this point, basically. So I would assume there will still be some coming, as you know, the flow really has not stopped at this point. So we may have to update
the one interview requester that's going to happen that we have gotten that is not currently associated with a team or like with a media conglomerate like Mark Jackson.
It's Borrego.
Yeah, it's James Borrego.
And I guess Charles Lee. I mean, they obviously wouldn't need to request from themselves.
That's true.
And I mean, the thing with, if there are names that we're not aware of, they would fit this line that the Bucks are looking at coaches who are in jobs elsewhere around the league. I think they're the only kind of conversations that no tampering. I'm not suggesting anything is going on any kind of formal stage. But the reason this all comes out is because it's within every candidate's interest, particularly with a job as appealing as the Bucks, to be like, look, the Bucks want to speak to me. So we're not going to miss out on any candidates aside from people who it is not in their interest to have it out there that they're even having kind of early stages of discussions with the Bucks.
So where should we start?
I think we should start by giving our top candidates and going through it.
Should we talk about Lue first? Because I left him off my list because he's not really an option yet, it seems, officially.
Are we sure?
Are we sure?
Oh, I mean, I'll redo my list then. I kind of needed one more, to be honest, so that works for me.
Okay, let's start with Tyronn Lue, current coach of the Los Angeles Clippers. And even though there has been no concrete news that he is indeed leaving the Los Angeles Clippers, we've now gotten multiple reports that not only are the Bucks interested, but other teams, including Phoenix, are monitoring that situation.
It seems like there's definitely some sort of dialogue going on, because the reporting today was, Phoenix is interested and there's talk of an extension with the Clippers. So at this point, I do kind of wonder, is Ty Lue leveraging this buzz to just get a bag? If so, good for him. I mean, I couldn't begrudge him.
He is a member of Clutch Sports Group, who also is, I'm not surprised who is putting out there all the Ty Lue business, considering his own ties to Clutch Sports Group, too. So,
see what you're saying, Jordan. I'm on to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have him number one on my list if we're assuming he's available. I think, for me, he hits the boxes, proven playoff coach. As we talked about on Rohan and I's last pod with Brad Fisher, the pushing your star player to be great aspect that I really think the Bucks could use, and I hope whoever they hire brings this to some extent. Well proven with Ty Lue and LeBron being that motivator as well as a tactician. I don't think, I'm not really aware of any big red flags or issues with Ty Lue. There is a solid chance he's actually, I think the people who like him probably overrate him, because I think he's a good coach, but he's seen as a demigod by some. I've seen some who I think underrate him at this point. I've seen, this guy's gotten nothing done with the Clippers, and it's okay, I mean, if one of Chris or Giannis was out every year, what would we expect the Bucks to get done too? I mean, it's a little bit out of his control, I think, at that point with Kawhi and PG's availability. But I think he would be a fantastic coach, a proven championship-level coach, and he would be my number one. It's closer than I thought it would be with some of the other candidates out here, but he is one that I would be very excited for the Bucks to get.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it just goes back to that Clippers-Mavs series from 3 years ago, I want to
The
say.
bubble?
No, it was...
Or the one after?
Yeah, they did it twice in a row. It was the bubble and then the one after.
It was the one after. I mean, both. You can look at both.
Basically, I think that was Rick Carlisle's last series as Mavericks coach, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So either one of those series you want to look at, because like you see it reminded me of a situation that the Milwaukee Bucks have been in. You have a player on the opposing team who is absolutely tearing you a new one. Absolutely tearing you a new one. How do you react? Ty Lue in both of those series, he reacted immediately to every single thing that Dallas was throwing at them, every single thing that Luka was throwing at them, and made the necessary changes. I feel weird saying adjustment. It feels like a buzzword at this point, but just the necessary changes, like whatever he's needed to do with Ivica Zubac in that time, he's needed to do it. He's made that happen. Like, you just see, like, even these Clipper teams that have been undermanned, like Phoenix didn't end up being the juggernaut we thought they were, but even without Kawhi Leonard, even without Paul George, that team was still pushing the Suns. Like, he knows how to maximize talent, and it's just like when you come in to a team like the Bucks, who already has a solid base. I don't think we've really touched on that too much, but they, like, these players, if they indeed run it back with the core four, these guys know, like, they already have a solid base. He doesn't need to come in and establish necessarily like a whole like plan of attack or anything, because these guys have played with each other for years and years now. He just has to be the guy that maximizes that talent, and I think he's the best in the business of doing it.
I'll raise my hand as someone who I think fits the bill of what Ty was describing as someone who's underrating him. And I was giving it a lot of thought because a lot of people, most notably the two people who've spoken before me here, have been very much on the Ty Lue train from early on, and said, okay, let's dig in and really get to it. And in giving it more thought, and I'm reading quite a lot of what's been written about him, really all across his coaching career at this point, and a lot of what he said, I'm sold. If he's not my number one, he would be my number two, and that would be very, very close. The thing that sells it for me is I think Rohan is right to talk about adjustments, but I think when it's phrased as adjustments, we often think of in-game adjustments. I think that's what we've become programmed to think of in the NBA, which is important, and it hasn't always been a strength of the Bucks and their bud, so it would be a welcome change. But I do think the thing that might be most important is something he himself has been quite open with, which is he is just fearless in making changes and being like, we have got to try stuff to find ways to win. And where the Bucks might honestly need more of that in the next couple of years is in their starting lineup, and in just getting really, really creative and moving away from some things that seem like the logical or seem like the only options, because they aren't going to have the kind of flexibility within the roster. And with that in mind, I think that's the thing that would have me kind of very much on board with him, is I feel like he'll try whatever it takes. Like, maybe Giannis is a full-time center and it works in a way that we've always been afraid of. Okay, that's not what you're going to do. I just would have zero doubts that he will try every possible combination. He will have a look at a lot of different things throughout the course of a regular season. And at a point where the Bucks roster is getting older, and I think it's also fair to assume we're going to see more and more injuries if, say, Chris and Brook come back. Reasonable to think both of those guys could miss some time. Brook has generally been very, very healthy, with one notable exception in his Bucks career. We know that Chris, it's becoming more and more of a problem. And yet, part of that is, okay, who's out there who, one, knows how to deal with superstar players? LeBron is obviously the core example of that, but he was a member of the Lakers championship winning teams at the turn of the century with Shaq and Kobe. He played with Michael Jordan, I believe, on the Wizards. So
he's there's a running Twitter joke that he's basically NBA Forrest Gump. Like, he's been in every room.
Yeah, and in that sense, Giannis would make a whole lot of sense if he was going to go somewhere else. To the, should we even include him here? Should we be considering him? My one concern, look, I think there's a possibility he could move on based on how things have gone with the Clippers. But that rumbling of an extension, whether it's even a leverage player, that's something real. If that means that Steve Ballmer wants to keep him, the Bucks aren't outbidding. There's the pull of LA, and there's going to be the richest offer on the table. Even with the Bucks maybe having some newfound money to play with, and Matt Ishbia having some money to play with in Phoenix, if Steve Ballmer wants to keep Ty Lue, I think they probably keep Ty Lue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the opinion of he's kind of off the board until something happens there, even as weird as it has been that Lawrence Frank goes out there and be like, yeah, he's going to be back, and it's been leverage plays ever since then. He kind of checks the boxes of both a culture setter / the adjustments guru galore that people basically just want now after collapse like the Bucks just went through. I think for me, he has plenty of. I mean, he's coached one of the greatest players of all time, obviously in LeBron, and has gone through that pressure cooker. But that's the same in LA. He's used to coaching star players, but he also has had a lot of success stories of developing, or him and his staff, I should say, too, because it's not just a one-man job, of really bringing up players like Ivica Zubac, Terrence Mann, name any of the guys that the Clippers have found that kind of are nice rotational pieces. I mean, even it did include in Cleveland, too. That was an older roster, but they, like the Bucks, they really helped find new ways to uplift guys that may have not found fits there, like J.R. Smith. Like, that is a development success story of like finding him to be a valuable role player for that team or stuff like that. That like, I think when we think of player development, we always just think of like guys that just get drafted or on rookie scale contracts. It's like, it's not always like that.
You could probably add like salvaged players. I mean, I think that's probably a way to put it. Like someone like, I think particularly Ty Lue's first season with the Clippers, I think maybe second season, the version of Reggie Jackson, when it just seemed like Reggie Jackson was just nothing and was. I mean, yeah. So
Russell Westbrook looked great there, and they won in his minutes, which has not happened in years.
Yeah. So yeah, I do rate him. I don't think he's this like, basketball savior, but he's a very, very good coach. But again, I don't know. I'm a little too realistic in that, like, I see the candidates that they are already out there, and just we'll see what happens with Ty Lue, but he certainly will have options and plenty of money thrown his way if he does entertain just leaving.
There's got to be something going on, because we're not seeing like, the Suns want Eric Spoelstra. Like, of course they do, right? But that's not getting out there. So no. I do think these teams, like, they have an idea something is going on there. And the fact that the Clippers had to answer questions about this, like, I do kind of feel, I mean, I think it's more than likely he ends up back there, because Ballmer has more money than God. He's still under contract. He's obviously a great coach. But I do think, like, this doesn't just come out of totally nowhere for a coach.
Clearly.
Another thing on Ty Lue, by the way, I think he's also been the closest proxy he's been in the situation that's the closest proxy to what the Bucks are going through, in that he had to come in to a championship level team with expectations of a championship. And that's what's happening with the Bucks.
Yep.
And he succeeded in that. They won the title. Yeah.
And he oversaw the last ride, I mean, over multiple years, but knowing coming in, it's not like, okay, there's an easy path to this being something where I'm here for 10 years competing for championships, which is the very realistic outcome for the Bucks. Like, this could be that there could be 2 to 3 more really great years and big chances to win a championship, but that could be it for a whole variety of reasons, even beyond the very obvious one. So yeah, that experience probably serves him well and may leave him less daunted by the proposition of taking a job like this one on, compared to maybe some other coaches who could be in the mix.
Also love his team's mismatch hunt like crazy, which that's just something I really want to see with the next coach. Like, they were putting Steph Curry in 50 ball screens a game in the finals. Like, there's not going to be small defenders hiding off ball with Giannis on the court if Ty Lue is the coach. Hopefully with a lot of the candidates. So Jordan.
Also, one last thing. those Cavs teams that under Ty Lue, they're not going to get remembered as such because they had to face the KD Warriors in the finals. But those are some of the greatest teams in modern NBA history.
You ask anybody who followed the Cavs, they'll tell you 17 was way better than 16. Like they're truly convinced that was the peak of the era, and they just ran.
They didn't lose in the East, right?
No, they were 4-0 in 3 straight series in the East.
It was a weaker East, but it was also like that team was dominant.
It's
absolutely
not nothing,
dominant.
It's not nothing getting to 3 straight finals, even if you have LeBron James on your roster. Plus, like, think of like the
4
last
straight. Oh no, he went to 3. He did 3. Yeah, Blatt did
as head coach.
Yeah, you're right.
But even like, I know we think of that last hurrah and them getting swept in the J.R. Smith incident, and LeBron faking possibly a broken wrist or whatever. But like, that team underwent like serious roster transformation.
They had their own Jay Crowder experience.
Yes, they did.
Isaiah Thomas, that was a mess of a team. And yeah, they beat the Celtics and made the finals. Yeah.
That's not nothing in my book.
It's definitely not nothing. We're coming from the position. We're having this conversation because it's definitely not nothing, you know? Being the number 1 seed doesn't even guarantee anything. So, not nothing for sure, Jordan.
Jordan, who would be the next highest on your list? We'll just flip-flop and go around, and then I'm guessing we'll all have left off some that we'll have to talk about a little bit at the end, but we can save that for later.
Should I say my number 1?
Yeah.
Mr. Montgomery Williams.
Is that really his name?
I don't know if that's his name.
I'm going to look it up. Talk about Monty Williams, Jordan.
I mean, it probably is.
There's probably someone who's like, who the hell is Montgomery Williams?
It was me. I was that person.
His name is Tavares Montgomery Williams.
Ooh, we got a little James Christian Middleton going on with Tavares over there. Yeah, very relevant, obviously, with the news today that the Bucks are expected to pursue. Not that that would be a surprise to anyone at this point. Just fired by the Phoenix Suns with wild card Matt Ishbia. Hold on to your hats, boys, because Matt Ishbia is running through the town.
This is stronger than any new owner syndrome I've ever imagined. He worked the Kevin Durant trade himself.
He was almost an owner for the Bucks.
Maybe we'll go down better in our audience. I think Jordan will get it. I don't know about either of you guys, Tyrone. He's doing what Todd Bowley has done with Chelsea, which should be the model for what an owner should just never do. And famously, actually, was Lazari's advice. And even when Lazary was doing interviews after selling, it's like, what would you tell people? And literally, he was quoted as he told Matt Ishbia this, which is to do nothing for the first year. Just sit and observe and do nothing.
He really took that advice.
I'm pretty sure that was in the Howard Beck interview. Lazary did.
It was, but then Lazary was like, Matt's a smart guy. Matt's a smart guy. He's like, okay.
He's got 1 T for the name. Never trust that. Anyway, back to Monty Williams. I think it's very relevant to talk about Monty Williams because he is I would say he has a bad rep. He certainly wasn't painted in glory leaving the Phoenix Suns, and the second straight year of really just going through an awful elimination game and just bottoming out in the worst possible ways. I think that overshadows a lot of the good work that he did there. He won 64 games with the Suns last year, was the NBA Coach of the Year. He took them to the finals in 2021. We obviously know how that ended. I did not really have a high opinion of him as a coach to begin with a long time ago when he was the coach of the Pelicans, and you see all the things that happened with Anthony Davis, and Drew Holiday obviously played under Monty Williams and everything like that. And when he got fired, I was like, oh yeah, like they feel like they could get an overachiever and all that stuff, and did not work out that way. Exactly. And I think for him, he's kind of he's not a Forrest Gump by any means, but he's bounced around and gone to valuable environments to learn, to grow as a coach. And because, I mean, the way that we were talking about the Phoenix Suns 3 years ago to how we're talking about them now is incredibly different in the last 15 years, back basically since the 7 seconds or less Suns. and Monty Williams had a hell of a lot to do with that. Does he have flaws as a coach? Does he, I see some people talk about how he's been outcoached by Bud, and that's not something that's hard to do. I just think we just oversimplify so much how hard it is to win in the postseason to begin with, but then to get to the finals and all the things that come with it. And how do you delineate, this falls on the coach versus, I do think he really took the Suns to their absolute limit based on how that roster is constructed until Matt Ishbia came in the door and decided to trade Kevin Durant by himself and all that stuff. So I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of people that have a certain idea of Monty Williams now than how they thought of Monty Williams, when he first interviewed for the Bucks 5 years ago, before Bud got the job. And I'm here to say that I still think that Monty Williams is probably even a better coach than I thought he was at the time. And I don't know. I very informed by the most recent days of just how his, I guess, coaching career is taking a turn.
So sorry, Ty. So the year after year of playoff disappointment made you think he's a better coach?
No. I was saying I think he, from when he was initially talked about as a coaching candidate for the Bucks the last time around, so in 2018, I was like, I don't know if I really see it. And now that I saw what he did with the Suns, yes, with some big goose eggs there.
3 straight years.
Yeah, but
I would not say 3.
But also, this is the NBA. We're in this situation because this is what can happen. There is not a magic coach who's not going to do that every single year.
I mean, I agree with that, and I agree with the sentiment. And let me preface this by saying this: I think Monty Williams is the closest facsimile to Bud that you can find.
He's offense Bud. He's offense Bud.
He's reputationally Bud, even what Jordan's just described.
But he's like.
But the thing is,
Bud is defensive
Bucks,
first. Monty's offense is beautiful. That's what moved him up. For all the playoff stuff and everything, and not a quick guy to adjust, that offense they run is gorgeous. And I think the Bucks would look great running all this double drag and all these fun, his half-second offense where you have to shoot, pass, or drive in half a second. I think if he could retain some of the defense and incorporate that, they would look like a machine again for the first year.
I'm not convinced they could do 5-out read and react some of those elements in the way that we've seen in Phoenix. Because Bud was once, Bud with the Hawks was an offensive Bud. And then with this roster, that didn't work out that way, and he became the defensive coach. I think we may see some of that even if they hire an offensive coach. But sorry, Rowan, you've got another point to.
So I think a lot of those offensive principles that he has are valid, like you mentioned, Ty. However, I do think it's exemplified by having one of the best offensive shooters in the entire league, in Devin Booker. And even with that, even with Devin Booker, even with Kevin Durant, 2 of the most offensively talented players of this generation, still struggle on the offensive end at times. And in terms of what I was saying earlier, in terms of Monty being the closest facsimile to Bud, while I'm not saying this is right, I'm not saying this is wrong, I'm just saying what makes sense to me is that the Bucks aren't going to go get another Bud because they just had Bud and fired him. If you wanted to keep a guy like,
are we sure about that?
Honestly, another Bud might be perfect. Bud, yes. But if you get the cycle, so they may take someone who has a Bud-like impact for 2 years, and they'll deal with the downturn because they're going to be dealing with a hell of a downturn anyway. And I think that's the way they're quite similar. Even going back to now, Monty Williams' time with the Hornets/Pelicans is beyond complicated for a whole variety of reasons. But by and large, his reputation had that same arc of, this is the hot young coach. This is one of the brightest brains in the NBA to, this guy's terrible. Obviously, his career and indeed his life took all sorts of twists and turns from there. That meant it took quite a lot of time before he got back to the place he did. I think Jordan's point, the magnitude of the job he did was, for example, we can make the comparison, Bud did a massive job to bring the Bucks from where they were with Kidd to where they were playing the Suns in those finals. the job that Monty Williams did was so, like, it was exponentially greater in terms of the scale. Yeah. It's ridiculous, the overhaul that had to be done there. And it's not like that the roster had to be completely transformed. Obviously, Chris Paul made a very big difference. And I think having someone of that level of ability, but also experience, made a big difference to a lot of those guys who were just rudderless within the organization beyond that. But Monty Williams, if this was 3 years ago and we were picking, or if this was if we knew what we know now about Monty Williams when Bud was hired, I don't think you're going out of your way to hire Monty Williams.
No.
But if Monty Williams can come in and he has the right voice and he has some of the right ideas that are just going to change the Bucks just enough to get you a really strong season next year, a really strong season the year after that. Honestly, I think they're going to be hard pushed to have a vision that is more ideal for what I think is the realistic path for the Bucks. So he is very Bud-like. If the Bucks could just reboot Bud and be like, hey, Bud, can you give us year one Bud again? They wouldn't have fired Bud. They would have kept them. So if they can get someone else who can give them that relatively short-term jump, I don't think they would be opposed to that. And that might be Monty Williams. I think your points are valid, Rohan. But his track record has been, he comes into organizations and he makes an impact. And he seems to have a good eye for, okay, here's what I can add or change.
He's a floor raiser.
For sure.
The Bucks don't need a floor raiser. And even if you're talking about, you're making very, very valid points. When you say year one Bud wasn't enough.
I know that, but you're talking about a progression. Again, it's the first half of Bud's tenure, if we take that versus what he came into, it's the progression in that. Like, I mean, if this is about picking the coach who is definitely going to win the championship next year, I don't think that coach is on the market.
Yeah.
That's the problem we have here. These are not a terrible pool of coaches, but this is also not, Eric Spoelstra is not there, who's the one coach where I'm just like, you know what? If the Bucks get that guy, they can probably just go win a championship.
But he's never been there, and teams have figured out how to win titles anyway.
But has it ever been more competitive than this? Even the market that they're going into, the fact the Suns may do the Bucks a big favor if Matt Ishbia is as deranged in terms of his basketball decision making as it seems like he might be. But for all we know, not as appealing a job as the Bucks, but a job that will have its own appeal too. The Sixers job could open soon. All of a sudden, you've got another MVP that you can go and you can coach. Maybe a more flexible situation all around, although they're going to very likely lose James Harden.
Not when that happens. It's not very flexible.
Well, you'll still have more options maybe than the Bucks will have. You'll just have a worse roster. But for some of these guys who are out of work or have their eye on, well, is the grass greener somewhere else? An opening with Joel Embiid will still have appeal. And then you've got the Suns. You've got Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and yes, very late stage Chris Paul. So you've got a competitive market. And as we know, and I think the thing that we just can't lose sight of, the playoffs are evidence of it. The NBA is going through it feels like, certainly in my viewing time, I don't know if we want to go further and say our lifetime though, what is a pretty rare era of parity where it's not like the league is devoid of stars. There was an era of parity in the early 2000s where, there was something of a lack of star power, and I think everyone looks back on it and acknowledges that now. That is the very opposite of what we've got. We've got a late stage of the defining superstars of the 21st century so far. We have got a more than capable rising crop behind them who've proven that they're capable. And all of that is fueling something that is much more competitive than ever. I don't know what the right answer is going to be with any of this, where I find it tough to just be like, Monty Williams mightn't be it, because Bud was it once. And, Monty Williams was on the other side of that equation too. He probably just misses out on my top three, if we're including Ty Lue in our top
I think
threes.
I have him third. I mean, the playoff stuff is concerning. Like, they've gotten their ass beat badly. Bad. Multiple years in a row. Like, it's not what you want to see. It's like if the Bucks' fourth quarter was a whole deciding game against Miami in the last 6 minutes or whatever, really the whole fourth quarter, That's like happened like 4 times to the Suns. And also like, is there a Chris Paul factor? He missed some of those games.
I think this year wasn't as bad as last year. I think last year was terrible. Like, what did they blow? A 3-1 lead to a team that was clearly worse than them?
I think it was 3-2.
Or 3-2?
Yeah.
I think I have it pulled up.
But that game 7 will forever be the most.
It's one of the most
3-2.
embarrassing losses in playoff.
3-2, and they got blown out the last 2 games of the series.
Yeah.
And there is a conversation, and it is one I remember. I feel like all 4 of us having on a crossover episode last year, reflecting on that of, did the Bucks break the Suns, like, kind of as a unit, so much so that they needed change, or probably needed to make change quicker?
Well, they did. The Bucks. They were the Bucks of the 2019-20, the bubble year. It was like you go so hard for the immediate success of regular season, 64 wins, all that stuff. They were the clear number 1 team that year.
The year after.
For 21-22.
Yeah.
And to just basically just shit the bed like that, it was very stark.
So a flaw, not a perfect cat. No, none of them are perfect, but a good.
No,
I wouldn't hate it.
No,
Can I interrupt for a second just while we're on the topic of the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah, we do.
Phoenix Suns associate head coach Kevin Young, who is being tipped as a candidate for the Suns job and also the Toronto job, has received permission to interview the Bucks.
There we go.
Apparently, an up-and-coming head coach, assistant coach, I should say.
Second favorite for the Suns job, and as I revealed to you all earlier, I saw his name and was like, "Who is this? There's this guy between Nick Nurse and Bud on the next Suns coach odds, and turns out he might also be the next Bucks coach."
Well, I think he was reported as not just a Raptors interviewee, but one of the higher ones on their list so far.
The way Woj is worded is Young is also a candidate with Toronto and expected to interview with the Suns for the new opening there.
Yeah. Let it rock is what I say. No, I think this is to kind of close out my point with Monty and just my overall coaching list. I'm coming from a point of view of I do not think the Bucks are broken, but Monty's perceived strengths in terms of relationship building, communication, all that stuff that doesn't work with all players. DeAndre Ayton. But I do think where the Bucks are at, I don't necessarily think reinventing the wheel is the kind of choice that they're at. I do just think, are there going to be overlap of ideas that they went with Monty Williams over, or going from Bud to Monty Williams? Probably, yes. But I do think that something of a refresher, just not throwing out completely what got them this far and this, for the last 5 years, essentially, it's not nothing. And I don't know. I just think for all the work that he's done there, and not just to repeat myself, but yeah, I just think he's obviously number 1 on my list.
Yeah, I think he's a great coach. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think in terms of what we've said about Bud, in terms of where he should go in the future, I think also applies to Monty Williams. In terms of a young team, like, you get Monty Williams, you're set for a long time. Like, if Dallas was to get Monty Williams, like, yeah, that'd be incredible. Like, you have a star, you have like somewhere where you need to set a culture, build those relationships. Yeah, that's incredible. It just, in my opinion, I don't think the Bucks need that because they already have that. They have that base already.
I don't think there's like a distinct line between floor raisers and whatever else.
No, of course not. Of course not. We talked about that with Brad. We talked about that with Brad. Like, you can't just section these guys into corners. I'm just saying what Monty Williams has shown his strengths to be is something that I don't necessarily think is necessary for the Milwaukee Bucks. Would I be upset with it? No, I would not be upset with it. Is he in my top 3? No.
I guess what I'd also add to floor raiser, though, is I think I'd argue that the Bucks, although their floor is already very high, I think they need their floor raised.
Yes.
They've won one playoff series in the last 2 years, so...
I think that is more the issue than the Bucks ceiling. It is raising the floor so we have some real consistency in the postseason. So I don't know if a floor raiser is even a pejorative to a coach in the context of the book sense here. Like, I think if someone could raise the floor of this team, and the floor is already significantly high, that would be a major, major appeal, I think, to Horst and ownership in the interview process.
It's not just a 16-game problem. It's going to be an 82-game problem as this roster gets older. And that's, again, part of the challenge of any head coach walking into this job that they're going to have to face for the next, or however long this era goes.
Okay, Rohan, who's number one, or not Ty Lue, number one on your list?
For me, it might. I think it's tough for me. All of my top three are kind of like in a little bit of a tight race, so it's not necessarily one. But Chris Quinn.
Oh, not on my list.
Not on your list. From what I've heard, talking to people associated with the Miami Heat, he is the guy to watch out for going forward when it comes into like head coaching jobs, head coaching vacancies. A lot of the Miami Heat players have basically gone out and said, like, yeah, this guy's Eric Spoelstra 2.0. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, flag this guy immediately. He is a guy who has shown, like, with his success with Eric Spoelstra's staff. And again, with assistant coaches, it's a little tough to discern. Wow, I'm talking too fast. To discern, like, what exactly are they contributing to the entire, like, product of success. But the one guy that the Miami Heat consistently single out is Chris Quinn. And if we talked about, like, hey, you can't, if you want to go get Eric Spoelstra, I think all of us are in agreement. If the Bucks got Eric Spoelstra, they'd be an absolute juggernaut, because we just have so much respect for Eric Spoelstra and what he's done, like, in this league and against the Bucks in particular. If you want to get the closest facsimile to that, it might be Chris Quinn.
It might be.
It might be, but that's the thing. That's the thing where you're just like, I can't definitively say he's number one, because there is a massive, massive risk when it comes to that. Because you don't know. You don't know if he's Eric Spoelstra 2.0 because he hasn't been in that position before. You have to be willing as a franchise, if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, to take that chance. And that is a massive, massive chance. We've all talked this to death. This is a major, major like inflection point for the Milwaukee Bucks and their franchise trajectory and all that. We don't need to belabor that anymore. But that means this is a massive, massive risk. If it pays off, could be incredible. If it doesn't, you're doing this again, but with much worse circumstances.
Also hasn't necessarily worked out with Heat assistants in the past, like David Fizdale being number one on that of the chosen one, and the person who I think the consensus was around the league, he was going to take everything that Spoelstra had, and personality-wise, he was the guy everyone wanted to be coached by, and that didn't quite work out.
You're not a big fan of Juwan Howard's Michigan tenure?
Well, that is maybe...
Let's ask some Wolverine fans.
That is maybe one that I will sidestep for a couple of reasons. One being my lack of expertise. And we'll leave it at that.
His hand in there.
Yeah, well, there are other things I just am not going to get into on that. Maybe Juwan Howard is really good. Like, he is the other person coming out of that. It doesn't seem that way to me in an NBA sense. I was trying to get as much information as I could get on Chris Quinn today, and I'll be honest, I was coming across endless stuff that is really good to read and gets you excited in the way that Rowan just kind of described, where it's like the Udonis Haslem quotes about, he is just Eric Spoelstra. It's all, Heat insiders being asked, if there's one person within the organization who embodies Heat culture, who is it? And Chris Quinn being given as the answer for that. He is supposedly referred to as mini-me for Spoelstra. I couldn't find anything where we get a sense of what his actual basketball ideas, philosophies are. So the thing in these situations is it's very rare that as much as someone within an organization might be, oh, look, he's just like Spoelstra. Put them outside of that and give them a chance to put their own ideas in place. There are going to be things they try that are different, and they could be good things, or they could be the things that really take away, I guess, the magic that's there with Spoelstra to begin with. So as much as I like the profile here, and particularly given the Bucks' problems with the Heat, and right at this moment, I don't think it would be a worse idea to be like, hey, come in and tell us, tell us what we need to do.
If anything, it's like, hey, what were you guys doing so we can not do that?
For sure. My only concern there, though, is whether that is Chris Quinn in another job. And I couldn't find enough that I'm like, okay, this is what he feels strongly about on offense. This is what he feels strongly about on defense. It seems like he feels strongly about Eric Spoelstra, and that makes it a gamble. Beyond that, until you put someone like that in another job, you don't know. Maybe it's worth it, but that is quite the risk for the Bucks at this point.
I think outside of the very best, like Ty Lue, and the very worst, Mark Jackson, I look at so many of these coaches that are kind of in the middle as like, I just don't have enough info without being in the interview room, right? Like what he is telling Horst and ownership and whoever else is in these calls about his plans for the team is so much more important than like Udonis Haslem saying, he's fantastic.
For sure.
I did think one thing though that I would add as a plus for him is the Heat description of him. I don't know why, it's somewhere on their website. He is instrumental in player development. And the Heat certainly have a great track record in taking undrafted players and making them into real NBA players. That is something that obviously would be a huge benefit to the Bucks if that's something he is able to bring over. We've talked about, Bud Wing University, and we saw like Pat Connaughton and stuff like that get incrementally better. We really haven't seen, though, like undrafted players come through the G League and stick around and make a meaningful impact on the team. If that were to become more possible with Chris Quinn, that would be a huge plus because they're going to need help building out rotations in years to come. But, who knows? I mean, obviously there's a lot
with that second apron stuff looming.
Definitely.
All the new CBA stuff.
That is certainly, though, a front office thing as well. You can't totally say that's him, but
its entire organization has to reset for that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's
would be advisable. Like maybe if the Bucks aren't already thinking like that, they should be. Looking at their situation, they should have probably pivoted to this is an area where we have to exploit any opportunities. This has to be the market inefficiency that we go after because we don't really have the options in other departments anymore.
My thing, Adam kind of hit my big question of the Heat are this. We'll say it. They are a model organization. Yet it's been surprising that there have been so few assistants that have come through Eric Spoelstra's staff that have gotten gigs. Like David Fizdale is easily the biggest example of that in terms of an NBA sense, and that did not go well. A lot of the things that they excel in terms of just obviously player development and finding guys that are undrafted or through the G League and everything like that, like they have a machine that's built to sustain the Miami Heat. That has not been replicable elsewhere outside of maybe like there's not a lot of organizations that just do that. Maybe the Clippers are another one that kind of come to mind of just like they've been able to find guys like Amir Coffey. I'm just naming random NBA players right now, but like stuff like that just happens with those types of teams. But it is curious to me that you see the Heat be in and out of this, and Eric Spoelstra is largely regarded as the great coach of this era. I mean, he's been doing this for 15 years at this point, and is so successful, and obviously a championship-winning coach when back in the days of the Heatles and all that stuff. But yet, no one is really trying to be like, why? Let's try to be more like them. Where obviously, from our vantage point, we would easily take that right now. I think there is something to really embody of what the Heat do and what they make them so successful. Of like, it doesn't even matter if they have guys like LeBron or Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade. It's even happy with Jimmy Butler. Like, they have been competitive even when they don't have a star player. But I don't know. It's just kind of curious to me. Like, it is very similar to, and I think we're going to get to it when we talk about Raptors world, but like, it is interesting to me that when they have the few people that have gotten shots like that, it has not worked out for in any sense of the word.
I mean, to be fair, David Fizdale, like, he was not born and raised in the Miami Heat coaching staff. He had a lot of stints other places as well.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
But he came to exemplify it at that point. And I will say mostly because LeBron kept shouting about him.
Yeah, you get in that orbit, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that is also fair. What was I about to say then? Oh yeah, I think what's really attractive about like trying to get someone from the Heat is like you mentioned, Jordan, like it's a valid point. Like, why hasn't anyone done this? Why haven't teams like tried to like poach guys from the Heat staff before? Why haven't teams been like, yeah, I want to be like the Miami Heat? Because I think just thinking about it now, it feels like the Bucks are in a very, very, very unique position where like this type of head coaching vacancy doesn't really happen that often for the Bucks. And what specifically they've had to do is worry about their playoff performances. Like they don't have to worry at all about like, hey, how do you perform during the regular season? Hey, do we have like how do you guys like play together? Do you need to like set a culture? Like, do you need to do all that? No, that exists. What they need is the ability to rise in the playoffs. And the team that does that the most is the Miami Heat. They are a franchise like you were mentioning, year after year. It doesn't matter who's on that team. They're going to perform well when the time comes. And that's basically exactly what the Bucks need at this point because they have everything else. They just don't have that.
I am reading up on Kevin Young, and I'm pretty intrigued. I think
Tell us why.
I might bump Monty off my list and move him to the bottom of my 3. What?
Wow, that was quick.
Well, I hadn't looked him up before.
It took days of you. You did a full circle on Monty over days, and then just like that.
Well, he went from 3 to 4.
Shiny new thing,
not...
bang, you're gone, Monty.
Well, and the longer I have to talk
Tavares, Montgomery Williams, they get out of here.
Chris Paul cutting the lead to 40 points or whatever, the more I think about it, the less enthused I am. And Kevin Arnovitz's, I think, last coaching deep dive, which is unfortunate because these were a huge resource. He says he's a essential hub to share ideas around the organization for Monty Williams' staff. He excels at listening and communicating. He's been a head coach in the G League for 6 seasons. Arnovitz calls him an organizer and big picture thinker who earned the respect of players with his work ethic and candor. He was a finalist for the Washington job in 2021, I think, where his sharpness impressed before it ultimately went to,
Wes Unseld
Jr. Yeah.
Also, first head coaching job was in Ireland. So, Adam, this one is circling back. Maybe someday can be the Irish team head coach.
Not inspiring me, Ty.
What? Nick Nurse was in England. He won a championship.
I know, and he won't stop talking about it. Yeah. I wasn't expecting
so was
a
Joe
Bucks head coaching candidate that had Irish coaching connections. That
he had to prove it, man.
Yeah,
and he had to listen to Robert Sarver talk, which is not easy to just bottle in.
I think it was Chris Quinn who went to Notre Dame, so there's a fighting Irish connection there. Am I right on this?
Yes, you are.
And he went to high school in Dublin, Ohio. So if I'm gonna just pin Irish connections to someone, maybe it's him. I don't know. I'm caught off guard by this latest news, so I'm not gonna tear up my list on the fly to make room. I'll do some digging. That's not as maybe I come to love it. Maybe it works out. He's a great coach, so that's a real badge of honor that I'll wear, and I'll shout about him going to help Irish basketball like I do with Pat Connaughton. But yeah, we'll see.
Adam, who's next highest on your list?
Did you have a number one, Ty?
Ty Lue.
Ty Lue.
Oh, okay.
And I think Adam and I have the same guy left, or at least I don't know how many you have left that you haven't said, but
I think we have the same guy.
I think Ty for sure. Probably Rohan. Probably everyone listening will predict where I'm going to go here. I disagree with something that Rohan has been saying.
Let's do it.
And I think there's a real danger if the Bucks take the culture for granted as it's just a thing that's built so it's there. That is not generally how this works or has worked. And particularly as it's not beyond the realm of possibility that we could see some roster change and even towards the top end of the roster this season. It's not just a lock that the culture remains what the culture has been, and then you can build on what the Bucks were in every other way. I think that's something that just I'm probably being annoying and stressing it even on winning 6. I think it applies to the Bucks defensively as well. As much as the pieces are there where the Bucks should be able to build an elite defense really under any coach, we'll see. You never know until you see who comes in and how they decide to approach things. But culture is one that I'm a little bit wary of protecting, in part because I feel like this Bucks roster has been built to a culture and they don't have the flexibility to really do a whole lot with that. And with that in mind, I think what could be the best option for the Bucks is to bring in a coach who, in theory, has basically all of the culture elements down, but they have outside experience, and they have experience from a wide variety of interesting figures, including people who are on our list, including people who would be on our list if they were to be available. And I am talking about Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson, similarly to, I believe it was Utah who was talking about the development angle for Chris Quinn as being something really appealing. And obviously with the Heat, that's very clear. Atkinson has moved around, so it's not as easy to kind of identify that, but he got his start as player development under Rick Edelman in Houston, and Rick Edelman was very quickly quoted as being like, this guy has a gift for player development. From there, he was on Mike D'Antoni's staff in New York and was Jeremy Lin's designated coach when Linsanity happened, and Lin has often spoke about his mindset throughout a lot of that was, I'm cut, I'm not making the team. And every single day, like a lunatic, Kenny Atkinson treated him like a superstar on that team until all of a sudden he briefly became the superstar on that team. And then what I could speak to kind of in a much more up close look that I got at through that time was he was the development guy when Bud's staff were at their development peak in Atlanta. He was the guy who really transformed a lot of what the Bucks or what the Hawks were getting at that time from the guard and wing positions, and really set a tone that kind of spanned out from there. I'm not entirely sure where, for example, Vitamin, something we've become used to hearing, started. If that came when Charles Lee came in at the tail end and kind of ultimately slotted into a Kenny Atkinson role, worked quite closely with him for a year or two, and then slotted into that role. But that's kind of the lineage of where that started. So with Kenny Atkinson, you've got a coach who is going to come in, is going to understand a lot of the Bucks core principles. He spent a lot of time under Bud, and even beyond that, working with coaches like D'Antoni, working under Ty Lue and Steve Kerr since. He is going to run a lot of what will feel quite Bud-esque. And I'll be upfront about it. The criticisms of him from his Nets time, and the stakes are much lower, are very, very similar to some of the criticisms that would have come towards Bud. I think the difference here, though, is since we last saw him as a head coach, it is that time with the Warriors, where he's been a championship-winning assistant coach, and that time with the Clippers. He's working with two of the undoubted best coaches in the NBA, in two major franchises with superstar players. And I think that added to what was already a very strong resume from a coaching perspective, as in a coaching, hands-on coaching, development perspective, and to someone who, it's kind of something that I'm looking for in all these guys. He is not inheriting a situation with the Bucks that is like the Brooklyn Nets team that he inherited, but I guess the similarity is the Nets had their hands tied when Kenny Atkinson came in. And it was kind of an element of, look, we're going to have not a whole lot of flexibility. We're not going to be able to change a whole lot. So what you're going to have to work with is what you're going to have to work with. We'll do what we can, but you have to get the absolute maximum out of that. And that applied to young players, but it applied to role players higher up the chain too. And it's what made the Nets into a place that, was appealing enough for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving to come and destroy, So he was the fall guy for that. I think that's pretty unfortunate for him. But given the experience he's got since, I think it could work out really well for him. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Bucks or elsewhere that if Kenny Atkinson, when he next lands at a head coaching job, if he very quickly emerges as one of the best coaches in the NBA. So I think I'm leaning with him as number one. Ty Lue is undoubtedly a coach with greater pedigree in a championship sense, but I think Atkinson could be the guy that maintains what we want to keep from the Bud era, but also now might have the kind of ideas from being around the Clippers and Lue, from being around Kerr and the Warriors, that they could freshen this up and they could just add that little bit of something extra that could make all the difference.
I would be very happy with the hire. Everything you said, I just think, you look at where, especially with the Nets, I mean, there's guys that we now look at as like, maybe for a while at least, as very established, maybe elite role players that looked like they were just going to be out of the league. I mean, Joe Harris was not really a guy before then. Spencer Dinwiddie. D'Angelo Russell was not on a good trajectory, and, you may still be low on D'Angelo Russell. He's starting on a conference finals team and made an all-star team.
Under Kenny.
Yep, under Kenny. And I think that some people will bring up, Brooklyn regressed his last year. Well, they gutted that team that made the playoffs for Katie and Kyrie. Katie didn't show up until year 2, and then eventually they got him fired because he wouldn't play DeAndre Jordan over Jared Allen.
Jordan.
Which I think all of us would agree we would be on board with playing Jared Allen over DeAndre Jordan. Also, Jared Allen got a lot better as a net as well. I think Brooke Lopez traded after 1 year, but yeah.
But that's the one thing that I actually
exactly.
That template was laid out by Kenny Atkinson, and I would also take a guess that maybe they were conversations that were had. I don't think the Bucks went and signed Brooke Lopez without Bud picking up the phone, calling Kenny Atkinson, and I think the vision that they saw of that, it was laid out by Kenny Atkinson. So yeah, that's also something worth noting, although they weren't together very long.
And I've seen people hold the Hornets thing against him. Reportedly, they wouldn't. They
why? That's a strength.
They wouldn't hire his assistants that he wanted. Was why Kenny Atkinson accepted, but then did not ultimately take that job, which I think is a totally understandable position for a prospective head coach to have.
He's got a history of making like principled decisions and just standing with them and being you're going to let me do it. And honestly, the Hornets thing makes more sense when you look at how things unfolded in Brooklyn, because going through a situation where you build this scrappy up-and-comer that's now a playoff team, and you could build gradually and have a real team and have a progression over a long period of time that made the Nets a contender. And also, they probably had fans more engaged than they've ever been in their time in Brooklyn with that team. And it got wiped out so quickly. And maybe not all, certainly not all because of him, maybe not all because of Sean Marks either. I'm not surprised that when it came to the opportunity for his next job, he's like, well, this is being done on my terms. Because also that's knowing with someone like that, you fall once in the NBA. If it happens twice, you're probably out. And it's as simple as that. So the second job has to be the right one. It has to be one where you're like, I'm going to get a chance to show that I am good at this and I deserve to be in the league. So yeah, you mentioned this even privately, but I would be inclined to put those as strengths, as things in his favor too, as someone who does kind of clearly have a vision for how he wants to run the team and will not bow down to that.
Is Atkinson on everyone's list? Jordan, is he on your?
Yeah, number 2.
Rohan, where is he at on yours?
He was like 2, I think.
So he's pretty consensus top 2 for us then. Wow.
I think technically 3, but my list, it's all very close.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, Jordan, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I don't think there's another example of a coach that did more with less. Literally, the Nets were coming out of that era, it was so hyper-focused on you're not going to have draft picks, and the few that you do, we're going to take shots on it, like Karis LeVert. That was a risky pick at the time, and he had a lot of health injury questions, and obviously that's continued into his NBA career. But, I think Adam's point of, he was pegged as the skilled player development guy with the Knicks, with the Hawks, all that stuff, and that naturally obviously got him a job with Brooklyn. And now, as this stage in his coaching career, you're looking at, well, it didn't go right in Brooklyn when they made the move for Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. And obviously a lot of things went against them, but, you still have to own up for it and people are going to ask questions of why it didn't work because there's still super talents, even with a lot of question marks. But the fact that he's going to teams like the Clippers and the Warriors and saying, I'm not going to take a job with the Hornets if it's not on my terms, like that does show a vision and show kind of conviction that, I think it kind of just shows you that not all coaches obviously grow with time, and not every team that you go to. Going for the Warriors to the Hornets, as Kenny Atkinson was slated to do for however long it was a week or whatever, that's a step down. And obviously you're viewing him as like, oh, that's a natural thing for a coach that wants to build out a roster and build out the team and do what he did in Brooklyn and all that stuff. And it's like, for his sake, he obviously wants to do more. Look at what the Warriors, Mike Brown with the Warriors before him. Like that was a deliberate choice of I want to be an assistant. I'm going to go back to, kind of just doing assistant stuff and just biding your time and finding the right job. And no one would say that it was a step up to go to Sacramento, but the timing of when he went and got that job, it obviously yielded results pretty quickly. So I do think that's an interesting thing to consider when it comes to like, just, I don't know, factoring where Kenny Atkinson is in his personal coaching journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think he, bettered himself as a coach, almost certainly, right? And I think if he had just kind of done not much or been on some less inspiring staff since the Brooklyn days, I'd be like, oh, I don't know. I mean, he's such a hot name for like a lot of NBA Twitter for a while because of, people were so tuned into this, like 2K simulation, like the hardest path rebuild that the Nets were on.
Yeah.
But then, he goes from that and works for, two of the top 5 coaches in the league, I think pretty unanimously. And that's very enticing. So I think he is probably the best mix of, while technically an assistant, coming with that head coaching experience as well. He's gotten all the firsts out of the way already. He's been in the playoffs, obviously not a storied playoff career, but most of the guys we're talking about that we'd love to have never coached in the playoffs before their first jobs when they won championships. Kerr, Lou, Spoelstra. So I don't look at that as discounting because he hasn't gone all the way in the playoffs before either.
And one more point. We, as Adam was talking about, like culture and just like kind of giving it as a given. Yeah, Giannis might be the most coachable superstar we've ever seen in our lifetime and all that stuff, but it doesn't. There's still a learning curve that you have to how to coach Giannis, and it trickles on down with guys like Drew and Chris if there is no pre-existing relationship there. And I don't think we should necessarily mark it as a given that this is a very coachable team and all that stuff. Kenny Atkinson saw firsthand of how it is to coach Steph Curry, and then on the other hand, you have Draymond Green punching Jordan Poole in the first 2 days of this year's training camp. Like, I don't know. It's I when we talk about like acclimating to star players, and obviously he went through probably the most rude awakening ever to happen in the modern NBA with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and just how that all played out with him. I do think that is something to consider of like, not everybody's coached the same way, and it's going to take time for things to gel. It's not going to be like how it was with Bud and they walk in and immediately just floor people like that. There's a very more realistic possibility that things just take a lot more time, and we'll see how it happens.
Yeah, we're used to talking about them as a very coachable team under Bud, and for that you've got to consider when Bud got in and what they were coming from and how he could shape them. Where whoever comes in now, a lot of the same people. I think generally we don't foresee personality issues within the locker room. But you don't know, because whoever walks in now is going to be walking into, as was talked about on your episode with Coach Brad, you're walking into a championship locker room. And those guys will have their own ideas and their own expectations. And I'm not going to say that they won't be coachable. They're probably just a little less coachable than they were at least when Bud took over. Or a little less kind of just open to any old idea. They're going to have a clear sense. They won a championship. And that is going to be a balancing act. And I know that was something, again, on your last pod, it's that idea of, well, does it have to be someone who comes in and they just command the room right away? I think the other possibility on that front is someone who will come in and will be able to say, I think the majority of what you're doing is very good and we're not going to discount that. You won a championship doing that. But here's what I know from where else I've been and what I can add to it. And I think that might be the way that, honestly, the message is easiest to get everyone on board with. It's like, okay, I think it'd be tough to come in and tell the Bucks just, everything you're doing is wrong. Which
no, I mean,
there could be coaches who they're not going to do it in that way, but they may have just Mark completely Jackson. Different. Well, he's not involved here. They might just have ideas that are very different in all departments, so that even if they're not saying that, it might feel like that. Where if you're Giannis, if you're Chris, if you're Brook Lopez, who maybe that's even a better kind of type of player. Your Brook Lopez, Drew Holiday's, Bobby Portis, guys who've been on all kinds of teams. And then they've also seen what it's like to be on one that works. If you're just come in and be like, yeah, all that's great, but we're tearing it up. That's where it could just be, not that it will end up in like a big blow up, but actually getting the buy-in that we see the top level execution of a new coach's ideas, I think is part of the question there too. So I think the other path to that is someone who will be very comfortable and is naturally inclined to do a lot of what the Bucks have been doing, but will be able to say, here is something that they also do in Golden State that works really well, and I think it will fit perfectly with this group. Or here's something that Ty Lue likes with the Clippers. So I think that is what really makes Kenny Atkinson intriguing. And even going back to D'Antoni, it's just, I mentioned this, Ty, to you. We were talking earlier, and one of the things that I try to not get bogged down on, but I just kept finding myself doing, is looking at guys' lineage. Who are they assistants under? Like, what is their NBA education? Kenny Atkinson's, I think, is about as good as it gets. Like, to be working under Rick Edelman, then to D'Antoni, to Bud, Ty Lue, Steve Kerr. Very hard pushed over the last 15 or so years to have worked for 5 NBA head coaches and to have had a better run than that. I mean, it's only Spoelstra and Popovich that I think you're missing there or could have added in.
And it's like very varied too, which is what I like. I mean, I think to go from one to another there, I mean, he's seen all sorts of styles and has experience in them. So who has any – we're obviously very high on Kenny Atkinson. I think that's probably the closest we have to a consensus pick. We're all in on Lue as well. I'd say those two are the ones so far that – and I think some of the assistants, they just feel like a little bit wild cards, but I don't think we're all out on some of them. Does anyone have anyone left in their top threes?
I've got one assistant.
Is it the same? You guys don't know. Jordan said he wants to keep his hand close to his vest.
I feel like Jordan might have the same assistants.
I mean,
Jordan, do you think you have the same assistant?
I was like, is it just Adrian Griffin?
It's not Adrian Griffin.
No.
Is there anyone else on the list?
Charles Lee.
Charles Lee.
Charles Lee. Chucky Lee. Chucky Lee cheese.
I mean, I'll go briefly, and then Jordan can say what he's got.
No, Adam. Jordan said Chucky Lee cheese.
Do you think that's all he's got?
I just want that to sit there.
I'm imagining now that Jordan's like notes for the pod is just like Charles Lee dash Chucky E cheese, and then like and then everything else is just like off the cuff. But
Montgomery Williams.
Adam, you may go first without revealing my notes.
I'm a big believer in Charles Lee as an NBA head coach. This is obviously about as steep a jump as you could make for your first job. It applies to all assistants. I think it may apply even more so here. I know something that's a concern of yours, Ty, is the fact that he's been in the NBA 9 years, and all 9 years have been with Mike Budenholzer. So he doesn't have that kind of varied experience. I don't think that has to be a deal breaker because of the strength of Bud's staffs over that time. And he himself, from long before that, has been talking about not just learning from Bud, but how the ideas that Darvin Ham would bring to the table, or Taylor Jenkins, or Kenny Atkinson, or Nevin Spahia, He came in just after Quinn Snyder, so he didn't quite cross paths with him, but probably some of Quinn Snyder's influence was still around the Hawks when Charles Lee first came in. He's been around a lot of people who've gone on to be high-level coaches, either really strong NBA head coaches or even EuroLeague coaches. And I think his experience is pretty broad as it can be for someone who has been an assistant coach to just one coach in that time. He is, again, someone who is known as being incredibly gifted from a player development perspective and was a really good player, a really, really good player. He's a Patriot League Player of the Year at Bucknell. Never quite got there in the NBA, was really close with the Spurs. He was a final cut with the Spurs out of training camp in his rookie year and still kind of holds up that experience and kind of how it was to work with Pop as being something that informs how he views the game. Also, I'm sure obviously that is how he ultimately connected with Bud, or how he's on Bud's radar from that time. But he's someone who fits a very rare profile. I mean, it is more common to see young coaches around the NBA. A lot of those guys are increasingly people who've come up through the video room and they're NBA lifers in a different way. Something that is always by players being talked up in a big way with Charles Lee that I think could be quite tough to quantify otherwise. And look, this could just be something that loses its value when you become a head coach as opposed to an assistant. He's a really good player. Players respect him because he can demonstrate his ideas in a way that most head coaches can't. Not that there aren't plenty of head coaches. Well, I didn't say Stan Van Gundy. We know what Stan Van Gundy could do with a basketball. But that has always been something that has kind of been held as he kind of, I don't know, he warrants a level of respect from players that isn't as just readily available to most assistants. I think he could be a really, really good head coach. I think the core ideas, philosophy-wise, again, in doing some digging, it's like, okay, well, what is he saying? And what he is saying is his three core tenets: daily improvement, competitiveness, togetherness. We all associate those kind of ideas and we'll go, oh, that just sounds like Bud again. I think the reality is, though, he's someone who deserves some credit for some of the good stuff that the Bucks have had. Things we're crediting to Bud, someone like Charles Lee played a major part in that. What this all boils down to, though, and this is to your point earlier, Ty, with assistants, it eventually gets to a point where it's super tough because we're not in the room for the interview. If Charles Lee comes forward with really compelling basketball ideas for what he would add to this Bucks team, this again then falls in something of that Kenny Atkinson mold for me, where I'm like, you have the kind of coach where you're going to ensure a level of continuity, where the good things should still, to some extent, carry on. And then what can you inject? What can you bring that's new to the table? If they're going this route with Charles Lee, and even if it's an outside assistant, I think the thing that we'd need to look out for, and the thing that the Bucks have to be mindful of, building that staff would be really, really important. And I think it would have to be built in a way where there are pretty senior voices in, I don't know, something that we haven't been used to with the Bucks, where just kind of name assistant coaches.
Mike
well, it might require someone senior. Maybe Mike D'Antoni wants to come and do like some assistant coaching. Like, that's literally just the name of an older coach off the top of my head. But I guess you'll get the idea of where I'm going at with that. I think Charles Lee is a really valid candidate and contender, and obviously he's getting a lot of attention around the league. It will just boil down to, okay, we know a lot of what you can bring to the Bucks, but what haven't you brought, or what hasn't been seen under Bud? What ideas have you got for what's next? If those ideas stack up against a lot of the other people interviewed, you know, I think it's more than valid to give him the job, and I'd be perfectly fine with that. We're just not going to know if that's the case. This is the thing that makes this difficult.
Yeah, I obviously echo a lot of the same points that Adam made. I won't say it as eloquently as he did, but I like Rohan mentioning Chris Quinn or assistants. Like, I don't think we all have done this, but I don't reject first timers out of hand. I think it's very natural to be like, hey, you know, Charles Lee is a candidate for the Detroit Pistons. Would that be an easier job? Probably. It would be a very easier job than where the Bucks stand right now. But I don't think we can dismiss out of hand of having someone that has been with the Bucks the last 5 years. And yeah, he's been, he was number 2 to Bud this year after Darvin left. He was the associate head coach. And I think it's very clear that he has a lot of ideas. He projects them in a very matter-of-fact way, but obviously doesn't want to overstep his boundaries, and has grown as a coach in terms of he's been interviewing for the last 3 years now. And, I think it was, I'm trying to think of like the teams now, maybe New Orleans, Indiana, stuff like that when they were looking for head coaches. And I know that a lot of people, there's this sentiment of, and obviously we touched on it too with talking about Monty, but I think more so when it comes to people that have followed Bud like Charles Lee has. You don't want to just necessarily just reject out of hand what the Bucks have done and what the Bucks have built so far. And I think the player relationships that he's built with the Bucks is important, especially as, hovering any coach conversation is the fact that the team is probably going to make changes in some fashion over the next, not just this year, but next year. Things will be different. And I don't know. I am intrigued by someone of Charles Lee's ability to, having seen what has happened before and maybe giving a new spin on things. Because again, I ultimately do not think that what the Bucks have built is broken, but refreshing up things or trying different things or being more adaptable in certain ways rather than just sticking, the systemized approach that obviously yields clear success. I do think someone maybe younger, like his age profile and all that stuff, might be willing to do that rather than just, hey, we're going to stick with a certain formula. Again, with the caveat of we don't know what this will actually look like until they are tasked with leading the Bucks night in, night out and having to do all those, diving into the X's and O's and offensive wrinkles, defensive structure, and everything like that. But I do think it's very valuable to look at someone within the staff like Charles Lee is, obviously purported to be doing right now.
The one thing I'll add, sorry, just very quickly, Ty, because this probably applies to everyone else too, but the one thing I think we mentioned on the last Win in 6 in regard to Charles Lee, what we shouldn't underestimate here too is, and we don't know, but this could prove to be important. Like, is Charles Lee someone that has a really good relationship with John Horst already? Particularly as John Horst keeps talking about the importance of having the right partner for him. If there's strong internal relationships there, that will also go a long way towards this. Yes. And where I would also generally be reluctant of that idea, I think you've got to be a little bit pragmatic. It is going to be tough to be the Bucks head coach in terms of there are times where your roster is getting older and you're not being able to improve in the way that you might like to. I think a good relationship is going to be more important than ever. Now, the reality could be maybe that's not the strongest relationship already, and we just wouldn't know that, and it will pan out that way. But if there is a strong relationship and there's a good feeling of trust, again, like that could be a very significant kind of leg up or head start that Charles Lee has in this process, because managing relationships with Horst and maybe even more importantly beyond Horst over the next few years with the kind of roster crunch situation the Bucks are going to be in, it's going to be a really important factor, and it's not something any of these coaching candidates will want to think about, but it's something they're going to have to get on board with.
I wish if he hadn't been an assistant somewhere else that he'd been a head coach somewhere. I know this applies to Quinn and Kevin Young, who I'm going to move back down now. It's a little too fired up about Kevin Young. But Kevin Young has had more G League head coaching experience, though. Like, Lee has basically had the assistant year at Bucknell, where you mentioned, Adam. He was Patriot Year Player of the Year once and 2 times Patriot League Tournament MVP. So one hell of a player. But he did an assistant.
God bless America.
He did an assistant stint there for, I think, 2 years, and then has been on Bud's staff ever since. So, I think he's did a summer league head coaching thing and may have coached a game this year at some point. I actually don't remember that now.
He did summer league. He was also, I think he was the only assistant, not that this is like major experience in any way, but it maybe just speaks to his reputation. He was the only assistant coach sent to Basketball Without Borders, I believe, last year.
Yes.
Where it was a pretty kind of lofty crew of coaches. Like Steve Kerr was kind of heading that up, and Charles Lee was sent as one of the people involved in that. The one thing I'd say is he is really young. Is he 39 now?
38. 38.
38, and he's been in the NBA for 9 seasons, and he didn't make the jump straight from retiring as a professional. I agree it would be great if he'd got experience elsewhere, but also he's been really successful as an assistant on winning staffs, and I think it's almost punishing him. Like if Bud was a coach who got fired all the time or didn't have success, he probably ends up jumping around to other teams. And I think that's a kind of tough balance where you're right. It gives you a more well-rounded perspective. But I do think also the reason he doesn't necessarily have that is because
he hasn't had to.
He's been so successful, and the staff he's been a part of across 2 different franchises has been so successful. So if he was 10 years older, I'd probably be more inclined to agree with that. But it's a really rapid rise, and at the same time, he's put in the work. He's earned his stripes, and his resume is as strong as it could be. Maybe it would be nice if there were just kind of extra stops, but the reason there aren't is because he's been very successful.
Does anyone have anyone else, or should we talk about Nick Nurse, who I'm sure there are many listeners screaming for us to finally address Nick Nurse?
Maybe it's just because I want to put Nick Nurse talk off for another few minutes.
His former assistant?
Well, no, I'm not crazy on that, but the person that I think we should mention, not like on my top 3, I don't think we should just not talk about James Borrego, because he is...
Oh, yeah.
He is with Monty Williams going to be, at least to date, one of only 2 people who was interviewed last time, and he was one of the first names reported. So they interviewed him last time, and clearly he didn't do a terrible interview, because John Horst was very ready to be like, oh, we've got a coaching vacancy, he's on the market, let's interview him again. I don't know, kind of interesting, just in maybe the most... And he doesn't get associated necessarily with this, but he might be the most prototypically Spursy coach in the NBA and around the NBA sphere. He has done 2 separate assistant coaching spells with the Spurs. He has been an assistant to a former Spurs assistant, Monty Williams, in New Orleans. He has been an assistant to a former Spurs assistant, Jack Vaughn, in Orlando. So he is so deeply ingrained in that culture, which the Bucks keep talking about it as if it's something they really go after, even though, honestly, none of their decisions outside of maybe hiring Bud point to a Spursy kind of philosophy at all. But it is something that John Horst, in his rare interviews, does like to bring up to this day, and ownership certainly hold up as the idea. Maybe that's just a romantic notion of you're not a major market franchise and you have long sustained success. It probably is. But they tend to talk about it in a way that's more specific. I was never enamored by him. In doing some research, his Hornets team was much better offensively than I remembered their final season. And considering the pieces on the roster and the age profile, that was not nothing. He has been terrible defensively his entire coaching career, but his Hornets teams haven't had good defenders. And a quote that I shared with you all earlier, but I'll share again, coming from Nick Friedman, a former Hornets assistant. This was in the context of talking about Borrego as a potential candidate for the Rockets job earlier in the summer. But it was, what would his ideal defense look like? And what Nick Friedman said was, quote, talking with him over the years, he wants to be able to play in the drop, play with a rim protecting big. Maybe he voiced that to John Horst a few years ago, and that stuck with John Horst. And Horst views him as someone who has had some good offensive success, who shares some kind of fundamental ideas that are similar to Horst in terms of offensive principles, and that maybe he is equipped to handle this type of Bucks roster and have much better defensive results than ever before. I am not crazy with James Borrego. It wasn't a name that got me excited, but I don't think we should just gloss over him because this is the second time around that John Horst or Bucks ownership have been like, let's talk to this guy.
I would be extremely excited if he were the lead assistant of whoever
For sure.
as a head coach.
If he like put out the scenario, if he's the lead assistant of Charles Lee, if they were to go that direction, I think that might be the perfect dream scenario. Getting a guy that has head coaching experience and has some success. I know it's the Hornets and it's 8th seed or bust for Michael Jordan down there, but like it's not something you dismiss out of hand. That's the thing I think where he's at is that he's very clearly overqualified as a lead assistant. And if he's the hire that your favorite team is doing, you'd be less than thrilled about it. But there's something there that he's lashed on to different places, different teams, all that stuff that has translated, even if the roster construction was less than ideal.
I do
it's
think
the Kenny Atkinson thing, though, right? Like, as in it can be good to go through it. It's how you get people like us. Not that we matter, but when a big job comes around, being like, "Hey, look, he's been a head coach. He's pretty good, and he's been on these teams who win a lot of games and have good progressive ideas."
The fact that he hasn't been in the league since he was let go by the Hornets just over a year ago, I do think he's probably going to have to be an assistant before he gets another head coaching job. I think out of all the names that, I think I've seen some people go, oh, these people they're talking to could be up for assistants. He's the only one I think that really makes sense for, to be honest. And I think he would be good at it. I'd be uninspired with the coaching hire, but I wouldn't hate it, I guess. But I would certainly have a lot of questions and bring them through the whole season.
Where's Nick Nurse?
Rohan, do you have Borrego thoughts?
I mean, I think I echo
Put
a lot
off the
of
Nick Nurse talk as long as possible.
We still got Adrian Griffin to come.
No, you know who's a candidate that hasn't been mentioned. I don't think is going to be mentioned, but just up top of my wish list.
I've got a wild card.
Scott Brooks,
Jerry Stackhouse.
No, Becky Hammond.
Oh yeah. Their season
Yes.
starts like now though.
Yeah, they're pretty. It's like it's too tough. Like I don't think it's going to be able to happen. But she would be number one on my list.
She did an interview for it last time.
Yes, she did.
If she was, if she wanted to.
I talked about this on an episode of Winning Six, I believe, with Jordan. I think it was the first. It might have been the night Bud got fired. Maybe we talked about it off air. Could have been something off air. Let's bring it on air, Jordan. The buzz coming out of her interviews with the Bucks, I think the Bucks were very eager to be like, yeah, we were really impressed with her. She was really good. Obviously, we don't need to just do that. Like, her resume in the WNBA speaks for itself at this point.
And
the experience that she has in the NBA too.
Champion as well.
I think if the ownership group hadn't just changed, she might be a name we'd be hearing a lot more of. That's pure speculation, but I feel like maybe part of the driving influence in that last time, and maybe where some of the really, really strong buzz was coming from on that, is no longer a part of the Bucks ownership group, which is why, although it's very difficult and there are real challenges, and I think it's really tough because it will be this absolutely groundbreaking moment. I think it will also, like, probably from Becky Hammond's perspective, she feel like it won't be the best look if she's just walk out on the Aces just before the season starts. So I think it probably won't happen for that reason. But I do think maybe we're not hearing about it because it might have been a different branch of the ownership group that were particularly interested in that front before. Just speculation.
And probably her interest as well, considering like we're talking about with the Aces season, though she was linked with the Raptors job.
Exactly. And I mean, come on. If anyone is interested in the Raptors job, they'd be interested in the Bucks job.
The way she revitalized like the Aces offense is just.
Also, like, I'm sorry, I know we're talking about the Bucks here, but when she is coaching AJ Wilson, or sorry, am I mispronouncing her name?
Asia.
Good Lord. Candace Parker, Chelsea Gray, Am I missing someone else that's on, like another big name on there?
They may have added another superstar since we started recording the podcast. The way
That is very
WWE
true.
player
But
movement
it's
has been
just
going.
like it's just the way of managing superstar talent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily.
Did you even
like,
Did you even mention Kelsey Plum, by the way?
No.
I did not mention
That's
Kelsey
what you
Plum.
forgot. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I would not just necessarily I'm going to walk out on that opportunity. Like that is a potential dynasty in the making.
Yeah.
So
and that gives the ticket that you don't have to jump now because you could have your pick of it. If you build a dynasty there and you keep winning, if that's the jump you want to make at some point, the opportunity will be there for you.
She doesn't the thing is I don't think she considers it a jump.
No.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. It is a jump financially. And I mean,
it's a major jump financially.
That's the factor that's always going to come into it, and that's really when I say that, that's what I mean by it. It's okay. You're being all as successful as you can be as a coach. That's going to be the question that will come for at some point. It's like, okay, when's the time to cash in? Jordan, you're going to do it again. You're itching. It's time to talk about Adrian Griffin. We haven't mentioned Sam Cassell. His name hasn't come up.
He has not been linked to the Bucks since he played for the Bucks.
Oh, yeah.
Well, his mic cut.
Yeah, his mic cut.
We cut him.
Yeah, it was too loud.
For the best. It's too loud. I keep explaining to him to not shout into the microphone. It's not ideal. Even less so when it's about Nick Nurse.
Do we even need to?
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah, we do.
Of course we need to.
Well, first and foremost, we've gone through a list. We've named all of the people who have been openly reported or linked to that the Bucks are either interested or have requested permission to interview.
Except for Adrian Griffin.
Yeah, we didn't go.
Well, yeah, which, I mean, I'm open to doing that instead. Or we can honestly group the two together.
Yeah,
because it's the lead assistant and this is just the Raptors arm of the conversation. But Nick Nurse has not been reported. He is the favorite, the betting favorite for the job, but interest hasn't been reported. Which is weird.
Yeah.
Honestly, maybe they're just not into him. Which I personally would be like, good for you, John Horst. I mean, I don't know if that's enough for me to forgive Mark Jackson, but as long as you don't hire Mark Jackson, I'll be like, look, okay.
If they hire Mark Jackson, we are covering a different team.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Herd.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going
to be a Herd podcast.
Herd.
Speaking of the Wisconsin Herd, to put off Nick Nurse a little longer.
What's Chase Buford up
My
to?
wildcard candidate is Chase
I was going to say.
My wildcard candidate is Chase Buford. Yeah. All he's done is win. Literally, that's it.
Literally, all he's done.
The Herd,
championships.
The Herd were first, and they hang a banner for it now. That they didn't play the playoffs because of COVID. He goes to Sydney, and they win back-to-back titles. Literally, since he's become a head coach, that's it. Obviously came up around the Spurs, if not technically in the Spurs, son of Spurs, longtime Spurs GM R.C. Buford, for anyone who didn't know. A fiery personality, does workouts with the team, is not the player Charles Lee is, but certainly, gets players motivated. I think everyone that I've talked to really loved playing for him and the culture he built with Oshkosh. It seems that has went to Australia as well. Also, Jalen Adams followed him there, which is kind of I don't want to say unique, but you don't often see guys from the G go right over to Australia who were, played with Team USA and a pretty prominent G League player over there. I don't think stuck with him for the second year. I'm not exactly sure, but strong relationship builder, strong coach, players coach, but a little more fire, I think, than, maybe some people, some other candidates than Bud. Certainly, I think, at the infamous interview moment that I was there for, actually. So was on the podcast, which is a plus.
I was going to say, very important, friend of the pod.
Yeah,
friend of the pod.
I think would be a big coup if the Bucks head coach had been on the pod and was someone that there was a relationship with. Ty, do you think there would be appetite from him to come back for a notable assistant coach role at this point? I know head coach, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably a stretch and a jump. Even though, as you said, all he's doing is winning, I think it would be pretty radical, particularly for a team in the Bucks situation.
Yeah,
if you're the Pistons, different story. But let's say if it is like Charles Lee worked with him, Charles Lee will know who he is. If Charles Lee got the job and maybe there is a Borrego or there's an older head, But then kind of next up on the bench would be someone along the lines of, I don't know, the other interesting thing with someone like Charles Lee, I guess, is what his staff looks like might depend on how quick Bud wants to get back out there.
Yeah.
Bud's gonna sit it out for a while.
I
Honestly,
did see today.
A lot of those people could stick around. Maybe not. Who knows?
During the pod, Gambo, a Suns person, said he doesn't think that they're going to have interest in Bud, which does.
And that person.
And with that, Mike Budenholzer is your new head coach of the Phoenix Suns.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say. Gambo is not the most reliable guy out there.
That is
like
fair.
Suns Gary.
I don't know if it's that bad.
It's the equivalent. It's not like for like, because I don't think there is a like for.
I think he's a volume shooter.
That is a.
He's not just a Suns hater who exists.
That's true.
Where's Nick Nurse?
Okay.
Where is he?
I don't think it would be horrible. I know some people
Nick
are really
Nurse?
high. Yeah.
I don't think it would be horrible.
I don't think it's a great idea.
It'd be good.
I think it could work.
I think there's a much higher chance of it not working than it working.
The pro is, if we're to go back to what I mentioned earlier, which just might be a 1 to 2 year, like 3 year, maybe you get the good, and it's all going to kind of be changed up before it would sour with him. He just carries an ego that honestly is unlike any other coach we've talked about on this list. Maybe there's a case that some of that is earned. He won a championship. Lots of other coaches have won a championship. I'm not into it. I'm just not into it at all.
He did it for an entire country.
Great, and he's coaching that country too. The latest in the long line of adopted countries that Nick Nurse has.
The England connection meant Adam was never going to be.
No, we're not going down that road.
They say all who wander are not lost, Adam. That's what they say.
I think how he went out with the Raptors and how he was openly like talking shit about players and press conferences.
I'm not a big fan of that at all. Or the hats.
That too. But that's just not it. And for a team like the Bucks, I think he's reached a point where it's like that's his coaching persona. That's his vibe. That's how he carries himself and feels like he's entitled to. And maybe he is, and maybe he goes somewhere as a great coach. But again, talking about if there is a culture that exists, and if it's about maintaining that culture, bringing something new to it. I mean, there are also questions over. He has had moments of very positive offensive stuff, but a lot of that was tied to Kawhi Leonard, and it's tough to give him too much credit. Some of the concerns more than concerns, the issues we had with Bud's offense, I don't know if they get solved here, and I don't think you're bringing a personality across that's gonna just solve things. That's a better fit. The only thing maybe we can say is the point that Coach Brad made talking to you guys, which is maybe just because Giannis and Chris in particular have been on the wrong side of crucial series against the Raptors and have seen, that face. I won't you put out any adjectives. I'll leave adjectives to Ty on this podcast. That maybe he commands a level of respect where they're like, okay, we know that this guy can put a plan together that wins you playoff games. I don't know if that overrides my other concerns, because by the time you've gone through a full season to get to the playoffs, some other issues could have sown themselves within the Bucks. So he's just long-time listeners will know. I just think this is tough generally. I'm sure there are Bucks fans who do want Nick Nurse. Let's also not pretend that we all don't hate the guy because we hate the Raptors. Like, they have been one of. He might hate the guy. And again, John Horst, maybe the reason we're not hearing the name is that John Horst just can't bring himself to consider Nick Nurse for this job. I don't know. Like, it's not an easy sell. It's definitely the toughest sell for us. Like, we saw Monty Williams in the finals. It's not the same thing. There's not a level of ill will. Like, I think
Nick Nurse is a basketball terrorist.
They've won one playoff series since Kawhi left, and it was against the Nets in the bubble who didn't have KD or Kyrie. So it was Karis LeVert and Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot starting games for that Nets team.
That was a wild run of pronunciations.
Liza Minnelli is starring for...
Well,
Karis LeVert and Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot.
He plays another NBA minute, and I will dedicate myself to learn it. If he doesn't, I don't think I'll have to say it again. Not even disrespect. It's just not going to come up for me. That player, I think, was starting the last time that the Raptors won a playoff series, which is not super inspiring. That was 2020. It's now 2023.
That's fair. And there's a reason that like Toronto was not as good as we thought they were going to be this year. There's a reason.
There's multiple reasons. There's a lot of reasons.
It's been since the bubble.
Yeah.
It really has. I know they played a year in Tampa, and that was. I don't think. Again,
they blamed it for everything that went wrong that season, and then they came and lost in 6 and haven't won a playoff game since.
They did, and I don't know. We'll get that's not here or there, but it is just a weird situation to just play in a city that isn't your home and just like, hey, you're gonna play here for 6 months. Yeah, I mean it's like bubble, but worse and part 2 and longer. Yeah. This is what my thing about Nick Nurse comes down to, is that he is the most available coach that the Bucks have gone up against that is credited as breaking the Bucks. He created this wall and everything like
barrier.
Barrier. And
let's just call it the wall at this point. It's not. We've got other problems. That's not the problem.
Respect Rohan.
Respect Rohan. Yeah.
Thank you.
He built this barrier and all this stuff, and it's that's what was the downfall. And it's like that was 2019. The Bucks then do not exist, even with the same players. It was the biggest moment of their career at that point, and they had never gone that far in the playoffs, and everything that was going golden that year came to a halt, and rightfully so. But it does not compare to where the Bucks are right now. And I think lost in the shuffle is that the Raptors of that year, who were 2 wins behind the Bucks that year, had Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry, Marcus All they would trade for midway through the year, Serge Ibaka, Fred
Bucks
Van
legend.
Fleet. Exactly. Danny
Siakam.
Green. Siakam.
OG didn't play in that series, but they still had him.
Exactly. And that was
Grievous
probably
Vasquez,
appendicitis, I think.
That was probably the top 7 or 8 guys that really actually factor into that playoff series. That is a really good lineup.
Yeah,
that is
people.
Yeah, and also the Bucks had Eric Bledsoe, not Drew Holiday.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about that.
Nikola Mirotic.
What was more painful, 2019 or this year? And it's like they lost to a better team, and they had Eric Bledsoe at point guard. Like I don't think it's that close, to be honest. Everyone looks at that series as, oh, the Bucks totally fumbled, and they did have a chance to go up 3-0. I think they lost.
That Chris Middleton shot haunts my dreams.
They lost to a team better than them, though. At the end of the day. And the big adjustment of the series was Kawhi guarding Giannis, which, according to other Raptors people, was Kawhi's idea. So
yeah, it wasn't theirs. Sorry, just derail for a second. You're saying this year is more painful? I know it's tough because we're still pretty close to it.
100%.
Yes, absolutely.
We were all in agreement on that.
I would say it like this: to get that far and to lose in the way that they did was. It's a different kind of pain to not even. I mean, they barely got out of the starting gate and were down 2-1, 3-1, and then fumbled the bag.
Got put down.
They didn't even have the bag.
Yeah.
Like that's a different kind of pain of just like, you go 6 months of seeing quality basketball, even with some blips here and there, and it's like it doesn't even come to fruition. Like that's
I'm still Raptors on that, purely because this year is proof that getting to the conference finals and being that within grasp of it is it's gonna happen few and far between. That was the chance. Like this year is a great chance because we know how good the team was and should have been, but that time it's right there. You can touch it, particularly with what happened with the Warriors and how the Raptors went to capitalize on it.
Yeah, but that's
it will always be for me because it's like it was there. Reach out and touch it. It was there. You're in the conference finals already and in position to win. And
especially because they hadn't won a title yet. They hadn't won a title yet.
I hate them. The worst thing about the Raptors is they're not good enough to get themselves in a series with the Bucks again. That's the worst. Sorry, let's get back on coaches.
I think my final point on that. I think they're kind of different level. I think it's apples and oranges. Like they're too different.
That's fair.
And I think this year is a little bit cushioned by the fact that we've seen the Bucks win a title recently.
Also fair.
2019, it's been like 47 years.
Yeah, I mean, also we know for sure that group is capable of it, and then to see that group that had never lost a playoff series together lose in the first round in 5 games it's hard.
It is. They're both bad.
Yeah,
they're both bad.
Coaches. Adrian Griffin, Nick Nurse's lead assistant. Pretty ugly allegation of domestic abuse from 3 years ago.
2020.
Yeah, and just I guess to add clarity and check all the boxes even for ourselves on that one. Allegations he denied. Allegations the Raptors just said, well, we're going to wait and see how this plays out. They took a very weak stance, and I remember them being very heavily criticized by their own kind of beat writers at the time. It was something a lot of fans were very uncomfortable with the stance they took. The situation resolved itself, if we're going to call it that, by Adrian Griffin sued his ex-wife for defamation for the allegations that were made against him, and that case was ultimately dropped. And when I took a look at what was out there in terms of court documents, it seems like it was settled. So no further statements that I could find in trying to kind of see, well, where did everyone ultimately come down this? Because the allegations were very serious and honestly pretty distressing to read. If he was the coach, I don't know if we'll hear any more about that or if anyone will ask the questions. But God, if I was John Horst or ownership, I'd certainly be asking questions in a room before you'd make him head coach. I mean, that aside, which not easy to just be like that aside,
it's a big aside, but
it's just such a messy situation, and in part because of how the Raptors dealt with it, that I don't know. I don't know what to do with it. The thing that was really interesting to me about his journey is he's like Mr. Scott Skiles. I shared this with all of you earlier, but he got his start as a coach because he was a final cut from a Bucks roster in training camp during Skiles' time there, and Skiles just called him up and offered him an assistant spot. I believe he spent 2 years, if not, with the Bucks on Skiles' staff from there. Then reteams. Spends 5 years with Tom Thibodeau in the best of times, I guess, for that Bulls team. Was widely credited. He's always very quick to put it back on Ron Adams, but with, I guess, creating Jimmy Butler, the breakout version of Jimmy Butler on those Bulls teams.
He got shouted out by Jimmy in his most improved.
He did, and he's always kind of seemed to be pretty bashful and kind of demurs on that, and gives the credit to Ron Adams, who's obviously a legendary NBA assistant coach in his own right. Went back to Orlando to team up with Skiles again. His career is kind of nomadic and a little bit weird as an assistant coach, and I don't feel like it was trending the right way until he landed with Nick Nurse. And there's certainly a lot of the shine of the Toronto effect there. He's a guy who, unlike Chris Quinn, where it's like, can't find a whole lot about his kind of leadership philosophies or his basketball philosophies. Adrian Griffin has had the opportunity to talk quite a lot over the years. None of it is telling me that this is the way to go. He's been incredibly highly thought of for a long time. Maybe he's someone who has a great vision. I don't know. But I would have question marks in a basketball sense, like most assistants. But yeah, I think we'd all also have question marks away from basketball too, just for some clarity on that, which is also just to flag up, not as in oh, well, we're going out of our way to get involved in other people's business. which I think in something like this, we probably would to some extent. We would want to know that the coach that was being hired. We have seen some messy situations of hirings in the NBA in recent years. If you don't get ahead of the thing, which is the obvious question, Chauncey Billups in Portland.
Chillups.
Yeah,
I thought we were
being,
going to
I
speak
guess,
in code.
no, I mean, everyone knows that was a messy situation. Like, I don't think that's a secret. So, I think any team taking him away from the Raptors and certainly making him a head coach, you'd want to kind of have all your ducks in a row and feel like you've got a very, very clear, comprehensive, and convincing response to any questions you have on that matter. Because it doesn't, maybe someone can point me to it and I just wasn't able to find it, but it doesn't really seem like when a resolution of sorts was reached on that, if we could call it that there was much publicly spoken about it, either from Griffin or from the Raptors, and the Raptors did not handle that situation well at all.
Yeah, I'm not really jazzed for all the reasons you said about Griffin as an option.
No.
I feel like we've got a fairly consensus top end.
I think so.
Yep.
I mean, I'd hope so. We've done win in 6 length here.
Yeah, which is good.
Thorough.
A deep dive.
Blame it on the Bucks. They are interviewing like 500 people.
Yeah.
The net is wide. We don't want the net this wide. We're on record as being like, hey, narrow this down a little bit, please.
Firmly grasp it.
I hate to even. There's one more that keeps getting floated, and I want to be brief because as at this point not available.
Doc Rivers.
No, although had a good year.
No,
I had a good year.
You can say Greg Popovich. Is this?
No, people keep. I'm not even really
Steve
interested in that. Steve Kerr, yeah. Who I'm
in on that. It's just not going to happen.
I'm in. It's not going to happen, but he would be probably number one.
It would not be number one for me.
It'd be close with him and Ty Lue.
If not for me. I saw a Warriors team that had a lot of the same things that we pull our hair out about the Bucks going on this year in terms of their shot selection and kind of weird rotations and everything else. And I think he's got obviously an incredible resume. I just think we have no idea what he looks like outside of Golden State. And he's probably still really good, but I would not be against it. He would not be my favorite pick at all.
Kevin Young is your favorite pick.
No.
Steve Kerr would be my number one. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but it's one of my favorite things to hammer home over the years. There's no such thing as the perfect coach, and every team has some level of these are the issues that we see game in, game out with our coach, and he just won't change. He just won't fix them. Why is that? Let's get a new coach in, and that solves it. The thing that Kerr has is honestly a level of consistency of dealing with the incredible pressure that the Bucks are now under. Of look at how expensive all of this is. Look at the age of your team. You've got to win. You've got to do it now. You've got to be in position this year. You've got to be in position next year. And if something goes wrong, you've got to get this thing straight back on track. The Warriors have had a whole lot of advantages. One, through good fortune. Two, through their financial resources that have allowed them to have a better run at that than I think the Bucks will have the fortune to have. But I think that experience would be incredibly valuable. And I just think as a personality fit, a guy who would command that respect, but I also think would mesh very well with the stars in this team, would mesh unbelievably well with Giannis, and I think they could build something pretty good together. I think he's got that. And look, he's got a lot of the things that we would hold up for other coaches who have lesser experience. Like we go back and we were shouting out like Ty Lue's experience as a player and he's been around these guys. Steve Kerr has all of that, and he has that as a coach, and he's got the championship rings. And I think beyond that, he would just be very kind of unflappable. If he was to decide he was leaving the Warriors, if the Warriors were to decide they're moving on, neither of these things are going to happen.
Well, Bob Myers' contract is up, and he is taking his time to decide what he wants to do, and they're at maybe as unstable of a place as the Bucks are right now. He has 1 year remaining, I believe, which is not much for a coach.
If that's the situation, I just can't imagine why Steve Kerr would be jumping right back into a job right away.
I think it's more likely that Steve Kerr would say, I don't need another job for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I agree. And particularly
a great ESPN guy to get back.
And that's very true. And he's also
You
like
usurped Mark Jackson for a second time.
he has gone through.
That'd be so good.
Well, let's not joke about Mark Jackson's slot opening up either, getting out of his contract. You don't want to think
No,
about
the
that.
whole point was that he usurped him, not that he took over for an open job. That's very different.
Maybe Mark Jackson goes back to Golden State. Maybe that's how that would work anyway.
And then if the Bucks hire Steve Kerr, that's the fast track for Steph to Milwaukee. So
Kerr's been through a lot health-wise throughout his Warriors tenure too. That I would think if ever there's a coach that they finish up in one spot after a very long run and say, yeah, I'm going to take some time or I might just be done with this, he would be the guy to me. But if there was to be a job or a superstar to tempt him, it may well just be the Bucks.
He's mentioned that the player he wants to coach most is Giannis. So
he and Dame should both follow through with their damn word already. Is what I'm
honestly
saying.
Play with Giannis, coach Giannis.
Are we just saying stuff, or do we mean it at a certain?
Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
And I know you guys have a lot of money.
Yeah,
he was the guy that wanted to trade Andrew Wiggins for Giannis. That's what we're coming down to.
I mean, who wouldn't want to trade Andrew Wiggins for Giannis?
I know.
Ben Dowsett.
Why is that name been uttered?
I think we're ready to wrap. I think we're ready to wrap. I don't want to talk about Pop. Pop should never.
No, that's not It's not a real thing. He's not gonna leave the Spurs. I've seen people do that. And I'm like, what are we talking about?
The report that was clearly about Ty Lue, and everyone's like, does this mean Greg Popovich or Eric Spoelstra? It's like, no, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't.
It means Ty Lue.
It means the guy who's being reported.
I love talking about unrealistic possibilities. That's what it screams to me. Like the whole pop.
Also,
what's Don Nelson up to?
Smoking a lot of weed in Hawaii.
I was gonna say
we do know what he's up to.
It's probably lighting up as we're talking right now.
Yeah.
He's on a Twitch stream with Numak right now. That's what Don Nelson's doing.
All right, Rohan, go.
Okay, well, thank you all for listening to this massive episode. Like, we tried to do a deep dive, and I think this was a very successful episode. So shout out to everyone who's made it through, listened with us. Thank you for listening to this GSPN episode. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast platform of choice or watching on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you are. Check out gspn.info for all the links to all of our other podcasts, plus our merch, Substack link, Discord link, playback link. Like, everything is there at gspn.info. Make sure you leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. Pod Random, and we will talk to you next time.